All right, well, welcome everybody to the first ever Coffee Chat event in our Coffee Chat event series presented by DULASA, also known as Drexel University Library and Archive Student Association. We're really excited to have Elise Ferer as our first ever speaker. Elise, thank you for agreeing to do this. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day after work just about your experience. So really quickly, I'll do a brief introduction of myself and then pass it on to everybody else before we get started. So I'm Ashley. I'm this year's DULASA president for the academic year 2021 to 2022. I was treasurer last year, and I'm really excited to have this event be the first of many that we've got planned for the fall. And for those of you watching this recording, please check out our social media. We'll put it in the video description if you are interested in joining us for other events that we have upcoming this fall. We have an Archives Monthly event coming up next week, and we also have our 4th annual Spotlight on STEM Librarianship panel coming up in November. So without further ado, Christine, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Yes, hi everyone. I am the current DULASA Vice President. I was the president last year, and yeah, I'm happy that we are having this event. And I'll pass it on to Lydia.
Lydia, are you good to introduce yourself for just a second?
Well, Albert, if you want to introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Albert Lynn, and I was president 2 years ago, and then event coordinator last year and treasurer this year. And I actually recently moved up to Massachusetts because just last week I started a new job at Worcester Polytechnic Institute as a STEM instruction librarian.
Great, thanks, Albert. And Lydia, you were gonna put it in the chat. Lydia is the current event coordinator for DULASA. So all the officers are here tonight, and you can find our contact information. You could also email, reach any of us at dulasamail@gmail.com. Back to Ashley.
Okay, so we're gonna get started. So a real quick mini bio. Elise is currently the Information Assistance and Undergraduate Learning Librarian here with Drexel University Libraries. She's got a wealth of experience, and we've got a couple of set questions that we're gonna ask, and just sort of have a nice evening chat. So welcome, Elise.
Yeah, thank you.
So would you like to give your own introduction or overview of yourself just briefly?
I mean, we can get into some of the questions. So I'm currently working at Drexel. I've been at Drexel for almost 7 years. It'll be 7 years in December. I was originally hired as an undergraduate learning librarian, and my role evolved really at the end of, I guess it was the end of 2018 into the beginning of 2019 into managing an information assistance program, which we can talk about what that is too. So yeah, we can just get into the questions.
Awesome. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was there a specific moment or thing or experience that led you to want to pursue library science?
Yeah, I don't know if folks looked at my resume or looked at my experience, but I had a career before I got into libraries. I left when I finished college. I did a 1-year program, but then I ended up working in the fashion industry for about 4 years before grad school, and then another at least 1.5 years after grad school. I kind of fell back on some of my skills there until I found a full-time librarian job. But so I kind of came to this a little bit late. I'd always liked libraries. I'm the daughter of 2 university professors, and some of my earliest memories are with my mom in the music library. So it probably, probably was meant to be in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, I've always been interested in libraries. My undergraduate degree was in art history, and it was very humanities library research focused, and I always enjoyed that part of it. And I had a job actually right after it, that was like the summer I finished college, that was actually ended up being kind of like an information desk job. And I felt like that was my first entry into reference librarianship, and I just didn't know it then. But what really happened is I got into fashion, and I'm like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I need to find something else. So kind of started looking around, and my mom had actually suggested looking at libraries and looking at that as a career path. And I knew a couple of people who were doing it. So I was, kind of asked, I went and, did some informational interviews with folks, found out more about what they did. I kind of asked around, and then I ended up applying to grad school, which that's kind of my roundabout path. And then, I, after grad school, I ended up going back to fashion for a couple of years, but that's a whole other story.
Awesome. I remember I read your CV briefly. You got your degree at the University of Pittsburgh in MLIS, right? Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was there for like 1 year before transferring undergrad, but I know that their program is like really, really good. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And their program has changed quite a bit since I went there. Even just what I was at a conference in Pittsburgh in 2016, and there was someone who was speaking from who had, I guess, chairs the program, or chaired the program then. I don't know if they're currently still there, but they were talking about some of the changes, and I was sitting there going, yeah, that would have been nice to have that class. It would have been nice to have something like that, because, they had, I guess, right after I left, they had some turnover and, done some revision of the curriculum that I, looking back on it now, I was like, yeah, that I kind of wish I'd had an opportunity to do that. But, a lot of my career has been, if it's something I didn't do when I was in graduate school, I've been able to get some experience somewhere else, which I think is a really big, it's an important thing to think about. Like if there's something you don't get in grad school, or, even if you're currently in grad school and there's something you're not getting out of the program, try to find it another way, either through an internship, a work experience. There's all sorts of opportunities for folks.
That's really excellent. Do you have like a specific example of something like that worked well for you, that you like didn't have in grad school, but later on were able to sort of gain experiences with?
Yeah, my big example was when I was at University of Pittsburgh, they didn't have they had one class in instruction. And that was an area I knew I was going to be interested in, knew it would be something that, would be good for me to have when I started looking for jobs, because a lot of jobs I was looking at, had some sort of instruction focused. And that's, really the way I've taken my career. But the class that they taught, it was only on the weekends, only in the summer. And the first weekend was the same weekend as the wedding of one of my very oldest friends, someone I've known since I was 7 years old. And I was like, yeah, I can't. And they're like, you can't take the class because you can't be at that first weekend. And I was like, well, I'm not missing my very best friend's wedding. Like, that's just ridiculous. So at that point I was like, okay, well, how else can I get some experience in instruction? And kind of what I ended up doing is, when I was at Pitt, I was in 2 different kind of work experience programs. I was in one that they called the Pitt Partners, and that gave me some experience working in their art library. So I ended up, working at the service desk at their art library and doing some reference there. But through that program, I did some, mock instruction for that group. And then, and I think I actually did a little bit of instruction. No, as I sat in on instruction for the art program. That's what I did. I didn't do the instruction. But then I also did an internship my spring semester. I think they called it a field experience, but it was basically, I think it had to do like 100 work hours, something like that. So I was at, there was a small liberal arts, well, actually it's a university now, but it started as a liberal arts college in Pittsburgh called Chatham University. And yeah, I don't know if you're familiar, but it was pretty close. And I can't even remember how I got connected to someone there, but I worked with someone who was a reference and instruction librarian there. So working with her, I did some, beginning instruction with her, as well as sit on their reference desk. And then one thing that was really helpful to me is once I got out of grad school and I was doing job searching, I ended up going back to New York, mostly because I had work contacts there in fashion. And I was like, well, I can work in fashion until I find something full-time in librarianship. And I knew it would be better. And I knew that was a better fit for me than, finding a job at Target or a job like waitressing or something like that, because I was never a good waitress. So I did that. And while I was up there, I got a part-time job at a community college in the City University of New York system. And in that job, I was also able to, try out some instruction and do some instruction of, really their first year writing for first year, English 101 type program. So those were kind of the ways I filled in. And then later on, once I got into my first full-time job, I pushed to have the opportunity to go to ACRL's immersion program. And that was really helpful in terms of, because I'd had hands-on experience, but that gave me exposed me to pedagogy and, learning theory and writing objectives and doing assessment and all these kind of things that I was kind of doing, but it gave me a structure to everything. So those are kind of ways I filled in and tried to fill in with, a class that I unfortunately couldn't take. And, I was also, I'd go into job interviews and they'd say, well, have you, and I was like, yeah, I wanted to take that class. I was told no, because I had to, and most people were understanding of that. Like that was something. So, if you do come up against something like that, you can explain things and people will understand too.
That's great to know, because I know that we've had discussions like amongst students and just even ourselves saying, oh, I really want to take, for example, I really want to take the class academic library service, but they only offer that in the summertime. And so it can be, you've got that restriction, but it's great to know that you get, even if it wasn't something like that specific, that you can gain experience with it.
And there's a lot of other great ways to, continue learning after you're in grad school too. Like that's one of the really nice things about the profession too.
That's great. Let's see. So do you want to talk what was your grad school experience like? I feel like you really touched on that already. But is there anything else that really stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, the one course that really stood out to me, or one of the courses that really stood out to me was when I took the reference course. We took a kind of almost like a more traditional reference course at that time. I don't know if libraries still work with that, or I don't know if grad programs are still doing that, but just going through, and we would get sets of questions each week and going through and having to find the answer. There was one that was really enjoyable about finding that answer, but then also really challenging. And that was one of the places where I really felt challenged in grad school, and something, that was really interesting. The other thing, and this wasn't so much the course. Well, the other course I really liked was I took a government documents course. And it's funny because the person who taught that course was a librarian at the University of Pittsburgh, and he's now at Lehigh University, and I'll see him at conferences and be like, you were my professor. But he was really well-versed in the topic of government documents. So it was interesting learning from him. And then the other thing it wasn't so much about the course, but it was about the experience. And, again, it's all sometimes in libraries, you can ask to do something. And, if you ask nicely, they'll let you do it. My first semester in grad school, I took an intro to archives course, and we had to go visit an archive. So I pulled up the website for the Andy Warhol Museum, and it said, hey, can I come visit your archive? And that was just really neat. They had all these, what Andy Warhol, famous American artist, 15 Minutes of Fame. Apparently what he had done is I don't know how often he did this, but he would have boxes, and he would just throw random things in boxes. And it could be like a can of seltzer, his his 3 sketches from that day, a matchbook, like all these random things. And so what they were doing is they were going and opening these boxes and like discovering and cataloging and, you know, making finding aids for that. So that was just really interesting to hear all of that, because I'm kind of I'm an art person, and, you know, so it was one of those things. And I think, you know, I don't do it as much now, but, you know, especially while you're learning, and it's like asking people for things like that, like most of the time they're flattered. Most of the time people are willing to help and willing to do things like that.
That's awesome. I feel like, yeah, I think I've talked to a bunch of people, because a big part of our program is the first couple required classes you have to take. You do have to go and interview somebody in the field in some respect, and sometimes that can turn into something really, really cool. So that's
Yeah.
awesome that you had that experience. That's really awesome. So one thing that I really wanted to ask you about, that I thought of a couple weeks ago, I know, and you kind of talked about this, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I know you've both attended conferences. I think you said you've presented at conferences or spoken at. Could you talk a little more about that? And, you know, do you have a favorite conference experience or anything like that?
Yeah. So I kind of tend to go to the same conferences, or, you know, the ones I like. I'm not a big fan of ALA. Sorry. But the last time I went to ALA, I was in Orlando, Florida, and it was like the end of June, and it was just not a good experience. But I tend to try to get to ACRL. I like LOEX, which is an information literacy instruction conference. And then I'm trying to think what else. I've also, you know, I've attended local things too, and spoken at local things, like ACRL DVC often has some good events. And I've been part of that board, so I've gotten really involved, and like all of you. And then also there's a first year experience conference that's happened a few times. And then virtually, I don't know if you've heard of this. It's the initials are CALM, but it's Conference on Academic Library Management. So it's something, and it was actually something that one of the librarians at Drexel pointed me to, and then I learned more about it, and I was like, oh, this is someone I know from immersion who's on the board for this. So I was like, oh, well, I should check this out. And I'm on one of their committees for the conference this next year. But so speaking at conferences, I really started. So immersion was really important to me, ACRL immersion. I'm not sure they're doing it in the same format I did. So when I did it, it was a 5-day program, and you would go to a college campus, and you would learn from other professional librarians, and you would be often with, I think there were probably at least 50, 60 librarians in the room with me. So I met other librarians at other schools that were doing kind of similar work to me. And that was really helpful, because I met a few people in grad school, but some of those people didn't end up in the library field, or some of those people ended up going into very different types of librarianship. So, you know, that was a really helpful way for me to kind of start to network within the field, was that immersion experience, and really get to know some people. So actually I started, the first conference I spoke at was one of my colleagues from immersion. She's like, hey, do you want to present at this conference? Like, let's work on a proposal. And we did that, and we went and spoke at LOEX, and it was great. We talked about how the immersion experience changed the way we were assessing our classes, and we each did like a little bit. For me, like when you're speaking at a conference, it's hard and easy at the same time if you work with other people. I've done it both ways. I've spoken at a conference 100% on my own, but I've also spoken with other people, and I find also it's almost like it's more popular when there's more than one viewpoint in the room. So it can be hard to coordinate, especially if, I think every time I've spoken with other people, it's people at other institutions. I did this in Pittsburgh in 2016. Like I kind of put out a call on a listserv, and I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing with undergraduate research. Is anyone else doing this? And I found a couple people, and I was like, would you want to like put together a proposal? And we worked together across, and it's always across different time zones. There's always like, okay, there's someone in mountain time. Okay, we have to figure out like Eastern time and mountain time and all this stuff. And luckily, like I think the first time we did it, which was 2014, we were working with Eastern time, Central time, and West Coast time. And I think that was before like really all the video conferencing was coming in, and we did like a 3-way phone call, and we're all in a Google Doc like working. So yeah, so that's kind of my experience with that, and it's kind of tied into publishing. So these are all things I do because I find it interesting, and not because there are some librarians who, you know, are expected to do this kind of work. And I do it more because I'm interested, and I like sharing what I do. And, you know, if there's something I'm working on that I think someone else might be able to learn something from, I want to be able to share that. Are there any other questions about that? Like, I know that was kind of haphazard, so I don't know if you have any follow-ups.
Oh no, that was great. And that's really interesting because I personally never knew that, you know, some people do it sort of because it's expected, but that's really cool that you do it because you enjoy it. One of the other questions we actually had was, have you ever published an article in an LIS journal or anything sort of like that?
Yeah, I published a few things. I started writing book reviews for, I think it was ACRL's book review publications a couple years ago, and I've done that off and on. Actually, that was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, although I haven't really written recently, and that's fine. Like, I feel like I've gotten a good few number of book reviews, but my first publication actually came from, my first publication, a peer-reviewed journal, actually came out of one of the first projects I did as like a full-time librarian. So before I came to Drexel, I was at Dickinson College. I started that job just almost, a little over 10 years ago, which seems kind of crazy to think about. So that was like my first full-time job. And when I got there, they said, you know, we're interested in working with our writing center, but, you know, look at some examples, find some examples of how libraries and writing centers work together. And I can be overly thorough about some things. I'm working on a literature review right now, and it's kind of getting out of hand. But so what I ended up doing, and also as a new librarian, I had more free time than other folks on the staff did. And that's always happened when you're new somewhere, you have more free time, and then your time kind of gets sucked up by different projects as you get put on different things and you discover interests too. So I did this survey. I did a lot of research into how libraries and writing centers working together. And I presented that to my supervisor, and she said, this is really good. Maybe you should turn this into an article. So with her assistance, like I would do a version and she would, go through it. I wrote that up as an article, and that was published in, I think that was like 2012 or 2013. And then it was, oh gosh, now I'm trying to go back in my head, but and then a couple years ago, probably, let's see, the last 2018. Yeah, I think it was 2018. I spoke at a personal librarian first year experience conference in Cleveland. And so Drexel has a personal librarian program. I inherited it when I got here at the end of 2014. And so that started in 2010. And so in 2018, I kind of did this presentation on like, here's all the things, here's how personal librarian at Drexel started. Here's what it looked like then. Here's how we've changed it, kind of just going through the history of it. And it was really well received and people were interested. So I ended up writing that up as an article. I started and it's a slow going because I don't necessarily have a lot of free time to do this sometimes. But the pandemic was a boon in this instance, because once the pandemic started, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this thing done. So I finally wrote it up over the summer of 2020, submitted it to a journal, and it got published in January of 21. So yeah, and then I'm currently working on something that might become a journal article. We've recently instituted a 24/7 chat service at Drexel, which, yes, I think most of you know about, or some of you know about. But when we first started talking about that, I was like, well, we should see if this really works for our users. We should see if this works for our patrons. And that kind of became this idea to have a rubric and score de-identified transcripts. And now I've got the data from it. And so I'm thinking about how to write that up for an article. And that's kind of what I'm working on a literature review right now to try and, think about like, okay, what's the scope here? And I'm going to hopefully talk to someone about the data we have, because we have all our data now. And it's like trying to, see what our data is telling us and what we want to do with that, and then hopefully we'll write all that up, because I think it's a project that can help other people. I'm interested in sharing the rubric because I did from the research I've done, there's not a lot on evaluating outside chat, like evaluating consortial chat for your users. So if nothing else, like the rubric, if I publish an article, they might say, oh, okay, that yeah, we can use that. And do this where we are.
That's incredible. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because for those of you who don't know, quite a few DULASA officers also currently work for the Drexel Library system and are some of the people on chat sometimes too.
Yep.
And it's so that like when you stated you were collecting research, I was like, oh, that's really awesome, because I know a couple times from forgetting to turn chat off at the end of the day that we do sometimes get people trying to talk to us after hours. And I've even gotten questions before about like, oh, how long is this? Are you guys going to be online with us? And now we can say, we're never offline. And so, theoretically.
It might not be someone from Drexel. It might be someone in California. It might be, including what was really interesting. I think you heard this is someone I know from Immersion answered one of the consortial chats. And I was like, oh, I know that person.
That's so incredible. That's like, but that's so cool to be interconnected.
Kind of a fun thing. Like, especially if, I don't know. I mean, I have my moments of introversion too, but when you have something in common to talk about, it makes it a little bit easier. So it's kind of nice sometimes to just go to conferences and just talk to people and find out about what they do.
Definitely. Well, when, if that becomes an article and when, please tell us, because that's really awesome. And I'd love to like follow up. Let's see. Okay. So this is something to, so sort of in light of that, is there would you say you have a typical workday, or is every day sort of different? We kind of wanted to know like, oh, what does like a typical workday look like for you currently?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it really depends on, it obviously depends on the job you're doing. So my job is really focused on managing reference services, and I'm supervising people, and I'm on different, kind of not really committees, because we don't really call them committees at Drexel, but different programs. So for me, the day really depends on, and honestly, at the beginning and end of every week, I kind of look at kind of what's ahead, because, and I don't know if this has become more of a thing in the pandemic since we went online, but my week and my days are kind of structured by meetings. So, what meetings I have. And for me, those are usually like, on Mondays, we have a check-in with all our subject librarians where we just kind of meet and talk about what's going on. Sometimes there's something specific we're talking about. Like, I think next Monday, we're looking at a specific tool for collection development and weeding. And then the week after, we're going to talk about the chat data. And so, but sometimes we just don't have anything, and we kind of just like share what's been going on, because when we all went online, we weren't seeing each other, and we're like, well, let's at least have some time we can kind of like see each other and find out what's going on. So, like that's one meeting. I'm also on the communications and marketing program. So I have that meeting. I have a managers meeting every 2 weeks. I have, what are some other things? We have, our department check-in really, or the program check-in, which is client access experiences. And then we have a manager check-in for that once a week too. So my week is kind of shaped by those. And then also there are reference shifts scattered in there. The nice thing about, so everywhere I've worked full-time has had some sort of referral triage system for reference. So when I'm on reference, I'm able to kind of do other things. Although, if you're doing something that's a lot of focus, like I wouldn't record a video during reference because the chat might come on, or, if I was pre-pandemic, if I was in my office, someone might, knock on my door to need something, or, someone might call from the service desk saying, hey, we have this person on the phone, or we have this person in person. So that's a lot of it. And then there's some things, not so much at Drexel, but my last job, there were some things that were would go on kind of like a year cycle. So in September, October, it was very instruction heavy. And then, usually around the end of October, it would start to wane, because that was a school where all the librarians were attached to first year seminars. And those first year seminars only happened in the fall semester. So we were all really busy with them, and we kind of we would plan, we'd be like, okay, we know this chunk. And it's less that way at Drexel. It's at least for me in my position, I know some of the subject librarians do have that kind of heavy instruction period at the beginning of the quarter, especially the fall quarter. And then it kind of peters out. But my duties are a little bit different. I'm less subject focused, and I'm more kind of service focused, and kind of some of these undergraduate things. So, and one of my other meetings, I go to a meeting, it's called the Learning Alliance, and it's something with all the co-curricular units at Drexel. So like writing center, tutoring centers, undergraduate advising, all that kind of stuff. And we meet once a month. So it can be a lot of meetings. And then, there's other things that are sprinkled in there. Once a week, I read the chat transcripts, because just make sure everything's looking good. And then, I have different projects I'm working on. Like right now, I'm trying to work a little bit on the literature review each day so that can get done. And Christine and I have been working on an FAQ project, and I have some things still attached to that to look at. And I'm going to have, kind of almost like monthly duties related to that. So yeah, I mean, one of the things I do like about this job is there's not really a typical day. It's really hard to predict. I mean, but at the same time, at least at Drexel, I have kind of set hours. And there are some librarian jobs, especially in reference instruction, where you don't necessarily have the set hours. You might have to work an evening once every 2 weeks, or work a Sunday afternoon once a semester. And I had that in my last position. We would do reference until 9. And sometimes that got to be a little long, but you make it up other ways. But it is nice at Drexel, I kind of have like a set 8 to 5 type hours with of course some flexibility. So I will say that's the one thing that's kind of the same every day and right now it's kind of weird, but I will get into a space hopefully sooner where I'll be on site more, and it'll be more like, okay, I go here, I work, I do this, and that's more of like the things that are the same each day for me.
Yeah, that was something we had to get used to again.
Yeah.
To all of us who work in that department, and yeah, it was a lot, but we're there. And I just want to say, based on the things I've sometimes experienced in chat, like if you read all the transcripts, you probably see all the weird stuff that happens in there sometimes.
Yeah.
Just sometimes,
yeah.
But
it's kind of, I mean, whenever you have a role, or whenever you do something that's facing toward any public group, there's going to be weird stuff that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, my first part-time job out of grad school was working at this, city university, and it was sometimes kind of strange. So I kind of got used to it, I guess.
Yeah.
There was one. So when I worked there, I would work 5 to 10 in the evening, and I occasionally I worked like a Saturday or Sunday. But and it only happened once. I think I worked there for like a year and a half, and it only happened once. So I was so when I was there, I was at a reference desk, and there would be student workers who would be working at a circulation desk. I didn't manage those student workers, but I was, for better or for worse, the adult kind of person, even though I didn't work there full time and I didn't really know a lot. I knew enough. I knew public safety's number. And once we did have an incident, and I just immediately was like, call public safety. There's something going on here. Because I've was responsible. It is nice that Drexel, they have someone who's a responsible, someone who's managing. That manager on duty role is really nice, because I've worked at other places where it's just students and it sometimes gets a little weird. So
I remember someone saying that there's a reason why that exists and why student workers can only be student workers, even grad students,
yeah,
it's definitely like much of
yeah.
it, I think.
Especially when you're in an urban environment, you kind of need that sometimes.
You never know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
really don't. Never a dull moment.
Mhm.
Let's see. So something that I think we all would be very much appreciative, if you have any kind of advice for those of us just entering the field of LIS, or if you're like me and you're really taking the scenic route through grad school and still have a little while to go, but definitely could still use the advice. If there's anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know if I have anything specific for grad school. When honestly, I did grad school as quickly as possible. I was like, and actually University of Pittsburgh was really great for that, because it was really just fall, spring, and two quick summer semesters, and I was done. So it was great. It was wonderful. And I also went there because they gave me, when I applied, I think I applied for this extra program, and they said, okay, we'll also give you this work experience in the art library. And I was like, great, sold, because I hadn't had any library experience at that point. So that was the big thing. And I think they also gave me a scholarship, and I was like, great, pay some money for me, yay. But I think, what I would recommend is, be open to things. And, be curious about different things. I think, reaching out to someone to find out more about what they do, or more about a specific library or a specific archive you're interested in, is never a bad thing. I would say, if you're going into a situation like that, don't approach it as, and I don't think anyone would do this, but don't approach it as, okay, can you give me a job? Approach it from a standpoint of, I'm interested about this. I'd like to know more about this. I'd like to work in this area. Do you have any recommendations? And people are very happy to share. And then I guess the other thing I think about too, because my career path was so with my background in fashion and art, I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be an art librarian. This is perfect, done, art librarian. And I had some difficulty getting into that first job. I graduated in August 2009, and we all know there was a financial crash in 2008. So I kind of got swept into that. And also, I think I was also interested in things that a lot of people were interested in too. And I necessarily didn't have, an extra master's degree. I didn't have a second language that I could kind of use to maybe get myself further in some institutions. So it took me a little while. But I think, and I ended up in an area that I'm like, okay, this is great. I'm working at a small liberal arts college. I'll get a lot of good experience. And actually, when I got into that job, it was a 1-year position. And I was like, okay, I'll go here. I'll, get this experience. This is my shot. And it turned into something that was longer, which was great for me. And it was one of those things I think I kind of got, it was half getting lucky and half like a 3-month-long job interview. Because what happened is I had been there for several months, and then they had someone leave, and they had someone who couldn't come back. And, suddenly it was like, okay, at least we'd like you to stay. And I was like, okay, great. I've been here for 3 months. I guess I've proven myself, like, wonderful. But, that experience, I got exposed to some things that I wasn't exposed to before, like working with undergraduates, working with first-year students, doing instruction that I hadn't really thought about before. And that led me into, for the undergraduate learning position at Drexel. And I'm also at this position now too, where I'm like, okay, well, what else am I interested in? What else do I want to tackle? And that's something that I know, people take jobs for lots of different reasons, but some of that decision making is, well, what interests me? What is there a challenge here? Is there something I can really add to this? And that's often factors in. So I think, not being so set about this is the thing I need to do and being open to certain things can be helpful. And, again, just being curious about different things and looking for the learning opportunities that are out there. I mean, one thing that's so great about everyone being well-versed in online spaces is there's a lot of learning opportunities that are now easy to get to because they're online and sometimes free. So, it's like if there's a conference you're interested in, it's free. Try to find a way to take the time, or, there are videos online. There's all sorts of great information. And I think, just taking advantage of it will be helpful.
There's been an explosion of that stuff. I feel like we've had a couple conversations about that recently, and that's so awesome. And that's also like what we're trying to do with these coffee chats and with the other things, because like it's just it doesn't have to be this big formal thing, but it's just, it's such a valuable learning experience.
Yeah. And also like local professional organizations too can be really interesting. I know the ACRL DVC is always, they're a pretty open organization, although I haven't heard much about what they have planned, mostly because I think everyone's at a weird, uncertain place with the pandemic of like, well, what can we do?
Yeah.
And, what does the future look like? Which I don't think any of us know right now.
Still very much up in the air. Yeah. Crazy. Well, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Can put them in the chat and we will read them off. Otherwise, yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, like Christine stated. Otherwise, I think I have like maybe one more, and then we can start wrapping up. Don't see anything, so I'll just go first. So in the very beginning, you mentioned about the information assistance program, and that was kind of an add-on. You definitely spoke about aspects. Is there, do you want to expand upon that a little bit more? Like, I'm just curious.
Like on what information assistance is and
yeah,
all of that. Yeah, so, Drexel University Libraries likes to be innovative and think broadly about information, and especially at a place like Drexel where a lot of the disciplines people are studying are, non-traditional or innovative in their own ways. So, oh, great, thanks. And I'll talk about that later. So information assistance, it kind of, I think when it was first brought to me, in our reorganization, it was kind of thought as, so, kind of like ready reference or low level sharing of information. And I did a lot of work to try to understand how information worked at Drexel, how the referral from the service desk to librarians happened, all of that. And what I've come up with is that information assistance is really the method that we get and share information at Drexel University Libraries. So basically what that means is what a lot of libraries, they call the reference program. So offering some sort of assistance in chat, offering in-person assistance, offering assistance at a service desk, all of that. And also things that help support that. So things like, the information people need to help someone at a service desk, supporting that as well is tied into information assistance. And that's where I touched on the FAQ project that Christina's done a lot of work on. And where that ties in is using SpringShare software to build up our FAQs. So one, we can share that information with our patrons, but also we can use that information when we're working with our patrons. So just making all of those connections easier. And I've been working pretty closely with communications and marketing, because that's also kind of tied into that of like how we communicate what we're doing, because information is so much, I think of it like, I don't know if you've heard the expression about the internet being a series of tubes. I feel like information assistance is the tubes. It's like the tubes that go back and forth that connect everything together, and kind of, goes through all these different matrix organizations we have at Drexel University Libraries. So that's kind of information assistance in a nutshell. I get in trouble sometimes when I talk about it like a reference program, because that's really the traditional way people think about it. And I do spend my time facilitating what our traditional reference services in other libraries like chat, and making sure we have a schedule of people who are able to do this, all that kind of stuff, and like gathering data and working with that data. So, and I can answer the question about ACRL. So the main things I do with ACRL is there's a conference every 2 years. I think the next week, they just had one in it was 2021. It was May. And it wasn't May, it was April. And it was actually all online, and we didn't have any professional development money this year. So I did not go, which is the first time that's happened in quite a while. I do like to go to that conference and kind of check in. But then they also have, so ACRL is tied into ALA, which, I think all of you know, but then there's also divisions within ACRL. And I've gotten pretty involved with ACRL's instruction section. And there's opportunities for that, for learning. And like I think it was 5-6 years, I was on the committee for instruction section has a mentoring program. And I'm actually now a mentor in that program, which is a whole different experience. I know ACRL also has different types of learning opportunities. And it really, I think going on their website is probably the best way to find out about those. I've done a few other programs with them. At one point they had an assessment and action project, and I attended that and represented Drexel and did a project with Steinbright Career Development Center. But they also have things related to open access and lots of other, kind of digital scholarship and other areas of librarianship that I honestly know less about, so I can't speak as well to them. But I would say, if you're interested in what they offer, go onto their website and, look at the different divisions too. Also, I found out about a lot of professional development opportunities also through listservs, and now what used to be listservs and now is ALA Connect. And you can join any of the listservs on ALA Connect. You do not need to be a member of ALA to do that. You can join those without. I have been told. I'm still a member, but I've been told you can do that. So, if you're interested in a specific area of librarianship, I would say, try to check in with ALA Connect and look at the different divisions. They have, of course, there's a Public Libraries Association, if that's something interesting to you. Thanks, Christine, for putting up that local ACRL chapter too. That's another way to get involved. I know another thing that the local ACRL chapter does. I think at one point they did have a mentoring program, but they also do resume review. And they post jobs. So, those are all things you can take advantage of, and you don't need to be a member, but I think membership is very low. I want to say it's like $15 a year. And I think it is free for students and recently graduated folks as well. And of course, if you're not in the Delaware Valley, there are other local ACRL organizations. There may be other local library associations as well. When I was in Pittsburgh, I went to some local Special Libraries Association meetings. They had a very active Special Libraries Association group. I know Philadelphia has a pretty active one too, but I haven't gone to anything that they've had. Oh, and also Philadelphia has a Medical Libraries Association group too, a local. And I know that because one of the librarians at Drexel, Kumru, was the president a year or two ago. So, cool. Yeah. Oh, and what databases? Okay. So what databases do I use most often? I I think so. I do a lot of work, and this really depends for me, the kind of students you're working with or the kind of folks you're working with. My subject areas are English and philosophy, and I do a lot of general reference. So honestly, the database I end up using the most is our federated search, Dragon search. And that was kind of true at my last institution too. I ended up using our federated search. And I'll even use that in my own research, like when I'm doing library research for a literature review, because it is a kind of a good catch-all for a lot of things. But especially when I'm doing reference in an area outside my subject specialty, I lean on our library guides and I look at databases that are on there. One thing I have found with databases is sometimes you can get away with, instead of knowing every single database, being like, okay, I'm comfortable with the ProQuest platform. I'm comfortable with the EBSCO platform, and, knowing enough. And, they are somewhat similar. But I think it's also good, if you're just thinking about generalists too, being aware of some other kind of more general databases like JSTOR, and also being aware of what the database can do and not do. So one of the things I didn't know when I was coming into my first job, I wasn't aware that JSTOR was not a great way to search things. And I think it was my first supervisor, she's like, no, don't search JSTOR, that's terrible. I was like, oh, okay, I won't do that. But that might have changed, because that was 2011, it's 10 years. But I will say at Drexel, I most often end up in our federated search when I'm working with English, folks on doing English literature research, which doesn't happen that often at Drexel. I will go into, I think it's now called Literature Resource Center. They've changed the name like 45 times, it feels like, in the last 5 years. It used to be Lion, it used to be something else. I think it was Artemis at one point. But it really depends on what you're working with. Oh, and then, so does that answer your question, Albert? Okay. And then Christina wants me to talk about the information explorers. So,
yeah,
Christina.
I was especially wondering, just because I don't know if it's like a unique thing, but I thought that was really interesting when I found out about that program at Drexel Student Workers. So I don't know if you wanted to tell us any more about it.
Yeah, I can talk about
share
that
any more about it.
Because I've done also a little bit of digging into how other libraries do this. And actually there's a really good, it's in my office. I think it's called peer-to-peer education in libraries or something like that. But, and actually I think, I wrote a review of it at one point, which was kind of weird. I could look that up and send that to you all. But so the Information Explorers is a program we have that includes all of our student workers. So all of our student workers are Information Explorers, and they all go through a program where they learn about each of the information literacy frames. They get introduced to all of the different services in the library, all of the different programs we have, and what they do. And this is the part that I'm fuzzy on, because this has changed over the years. So I'm really involved in the information literacy education aspect of that. And I did a lot of looking at peer assistance and peer education within libraries, peer-to-peer learning. And a lot of libraries have this model where, and I think Penn State has one, I know there's a few others, where they train students to help other students with research. And then they use those students almost as like mini reference librarians. Or they station a student in a writing center. So there's, research assistant ends up at a point of need. We didn't want to do that, which was very kind of frustrating to me, because I'm like, okay, I understand how to do that. But what we were told to do, or what we were tasked with doing, is educate students on information literacy, data literacy, other meta literacies, and what we do in libraries and what we value, and then inspire those students to create their own projects or engage their peers with information literacy. And I think at one point we wanted to call the program peer information engagement or something like that. It was like peer now I can't remember, but it was, I found it was a better descriptor of the program because it was really all about engaging peers in libraries and library resources and what we do. And I find information explorer is a little bit too fuzzy of a term for what we're trying to do. But really what we're trying to do is get students thinking about issues with information. One of the ways we've taken this program is I went to an online conference this past spring, and there was someone at another institution. They were talking about how their student workers, they almost have them in like a reading club. So, or something where they watch webinars and they read articles and then talk about them. And that's the way they engage their students with, you know, what's going on in the library field, and also give them something more to think about other than just sitting at a desk and checking out books. And hopefully, you know, use that too to help students maybe develop a resume, maybe work on customer service skills, or, you know, other things that they can help the students get to a next level, other than saying like, oh, I sat at a circulation desk for 4 years in college. Giving them more. And that's something we've been thinking about too. So recently we've been adding that into, you know, giving students things to read about misinformation, about other things. Misinformation is always the one that comes top of mind, but, you know, other aspects, privacy, digital privacy, all sorts of things like this. And, you know, the way information spreads and the way we use information. So does that help explain?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we are at time.
Yes.
So if there's any last minute questions, we're very, very thankful, Elise, for your time tonight.
Thank you so
and
much
for sharing all of your advice and experience with us.
This has been fun. I hope it's been helpful. And, you know, if anyone
Absolutely.
has any follow-up questions, you can email me. I'm pretty easy to find on the Drexel University Libraries website. So
Sweet.
yeah, and Christine put my email in the chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everybody who came, and just a quick little plug. Next Thursday, same time, we are having another event. It's our Archives Month Philly event, where we will be having a panel of students who have completed their capstone in archival settings. It's a great event to come to if that's what you're focusing on doing for your capstone, or even if you're just curious about the capstone like me, as somebody who hasn't completed it yet. And then, of course, we have plenty of other events coming up, so we will talk more about those on social media and at next week's thing. But thanks, everybody. Thank you again, Elise. This was awesome. I think this was a very successful first coffee chat. And yeah, I'll see about half of you at work next couple of days. So everybody else, see you in person or via email, I think. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks everybody. Yeah, have a good night.
Good night, guys.